Hello and welcome to the CBV podcast.
Hello and welcome. My name is Cloud, and I finally got round to seeing Mortal Kombat 2021, the movie. Sorry for the late review, but obviously I'm from the UK, and so the UK actually didn't have the film released until the 6th of May. We were a number of weeks behind America's release, so I would have loved to have got it earlier for especially my American audiences out there. But no, finally we got the movie released here. I just got around to watching it a few days ago. I've compiled all my thoughts together on the movie, and I just want to share that with you today. So, Mortal Kombat 2021. First of all, I should say I'm a very casual fan of the game. I don't really go... the only reason I ever got into playing the games is because I used to live with a housemate who is a die-hard fan of the games. So I never really played the story mode. I let her do all that. All I really did was play online with one-on-one matches. So that's really kind of my basic knowledge. All I really know is, I can recognize characters and I have a rough idea of what their power set is and, sort of the look of the game. But I don't really know anything about character developments, character stories, the actual plot of the game. So when I do this review, you're just going to have to, take what I say with a grain of salt. I'm really more coming at this from an audience member who doesn't really know a lot about the games. So I'm a casual fan of the game, so I know some things, but I don't know everything. So I don't really know how accurate a depiction this movie really is without actually researching the game for myself. So let's start talking about it. The plot for me was... It was a bit messy. It was a bit all over the place. And there's two major factors to that. First of all, the tournament itself, the Mortal Kombat tournament. I should say spoilers, actually, if you're listening to this, because I'm just going to dive right in and spoil the whole thing. So spoiler alert now. So with the tournament in this movie's actually a prequel. It's not even... it's a prequel to the tournament. It's not actually focusing on the main Mortal Kombat tournament itself, which I assume the games are revolved around. So it was a little weird that you never actually see the Mortal Kombat tournament. They talk about it a lot, and they talk about what they're going to do to prepare for it, but you never actually see it. The whole point of this movie is to set up a sequel where you will see the tournament. And I'm fine with that. Just that, as information on its own, I think is fine to do in a movie, especially as I'm pretty sure the director said he intended for this film to be part of a trilogy. So if he's got a trilogy planned out, I'm completely fine with that as a setup. But the way they handled it was very confusing in the story, because the whole point of the world is that, you've got Earthrealm, which I guess is our reality, and you've got Outer World, I think it's called, which is where all the villains live. And basically, the villains from Outworld want to take over Earthrealm. And the only way that they're able to do that, apparently, is to have their champions from their world fight champions from our world, and whoever wins the tournament gets to, I guess, do whatever they want with the other realm or the other world. And that's fine as an idea and a concept of how the world works. But in this movie, they very quickly established that you can cheat your way into winning the tournament. So basically in this movie, the villains decide, hey, we want to win this tournament. And we're taking no chances. We just need to win this one tournament to be able to invade and take over the Earthrealm. And so they decide, we'll just go to Earthrealm and we'll just murder their fighters and champions for the tournament before the tournament even begins. And then that kind of raised confusion immediately, because I'm like, so if the movie is saying these two worlds have to battle it out in an official tournament, what's the point of that if you can get away with basically cheating and just murder your competitors before the competition even begins? Because they do say in the movie that the gods, I guess, that are responsible for this tournament are too lazy, and they'll happily just turn a blind eye to the fact that the villain of the movie is just going to cheat his way to win the tournament. And immediately, that's just like a red flag. How is this movie supposed to... What's the logic of this movie? I mean, it makes the tournament pointless because they'll have no champions to defeat if they succeeded in murdering their opponents. So then what's the point in tournament? You don't really need the tournament. If you can murder people before then, just do that, and then you have the freedom to invade the Earth realm regardless. So I don't know if that's part of the video game story or if they've just kind of thrown that in there, because I didn't know how to write fight set pieces into a movie that doesn't actually have the Mortal Kombat tournament into it. It was just weird. So it kind of didn't make sense how the tournament works, because you can happily cheat. So that was my first issue with the story. The second issue I have, and I'm pretty confident in saying that this is a new feature that they've added to this version of their Mortal Kombat world. Basically, the only way you can compete in the tournament is if you have this dragon birthmark looking thing on your skin. If you have that on your body, then basically it means it's like an invitation and you are worthy to compete in the Mortal Kombat tournament. And that, again, that bit of information on its own, I'm fine with. Cool. This is how they choose their champions. They just have to, hope that they get this marking on them. Or if you want to still get into the tournament and you haven't been chosen, all you need to do is defeat someone who has this dragon marking, and if you defeat them and kill them, then you earn the marking yourself. So that on its own, I think, is a fine addition, even if it's not part of the games. That makes sense. What kind of ruins it is that this dragon marking gives you powers, or at least gives you the opportunity to unlock your power. I don't think it guarantees you'll actually get your power. You have to actually figure out how to unlock your power. And I was like, okay, that's interesting, and that could work. But the minute you get to the point where Jax, the character who has mechanical arms, the cyborg dude, as soon as you get to him unlocking his power, it just kind of doesn't work. I can understand if you've got sort of an organic power, like Kano and his laser eyes, or a teleporting power, or just lightning or whatever. I can sort of understand that. But as soon as technology gets involved into it, like Jax's power is that he upgraded his crappy robot arms to better arms, it kind of it doesn't really fit in as well. It kind of feels weird, because it's like, well, that's a piece of technology. That's not really a power per se. I don't know. It was just bizarre, and it kind of took me out of it. I was like, okay, this almost worked until you get to the part we have characters who have technology as an ability. And then it's a bit more confusing, because there's a character called Liu Kang, I believe his name is, and he basically can throw his hat as like a deadly frisbee. And so they keep making fun of that, saying that's your power. But that's not just his power, because immediately, as soon as we're introduced to that character, he also has teleporting powers. Like, I guess he can use his hat to teleport, but we only see that used once. So then I'm like, well, he seemed to get more powers. So can you get more than one power? Because throwing a deadly frisbee and teleporting are like two different abilities. And again, it's that thing where, like, if they hadn't mentioned that his hat throwing was a power, I would have just assumed that his power was teleporting. But seeing as how they referenced his deadly hat frisbee as a power, I'm like, oh, I guess he didn't have that before he got the marking. So then some people get more than one power, and then that kind of seems weirdly unfair in a fight to the death. The dragon marking kind of worked, but then didn't work in certain moments. Like, it actually kind of ruined sort of your what's it called? Suspension of belief, I guess. So those were the two major things. Just the tournament itself didn't make a lot of sense, and the dragon markings, it wasn't needed. I think they should have just used it as a way to invite champions, or not invite, but show that they're chosen to fight in it, and not do the power thing. Because also Kano, in the video games, he has a cyborg eye that shoots lasers, but in this movie, he doesn't have the cyborg eye. The dragon marking just gives him the ability to shoot a laser out of his eye, which is a bit more distracting because he can only shoot the laser out of one of his two good eyes. So it kind of feels weird that he couldn't have laser eyes out of both his eyes. And I get it, it's because he doesn't do that in the game. But then what's the point of having the dragon marking give him that power if he's just going to have the cyborg guy later. And I know that in this movie, he doesn't get the cyborg guy, but the way they set it up makes it seem like in the sequel, they'll somehow bring him back and he'll get the cyborg guy. And the only reason I say that is because, you know, as soon as we see Kano, he gets into a fight with Reptile. Reptile rips his face, and so he gets these scars around his sort of eye that will become his laser eye. And then the last scene we have of Kano, Sonya stabs him in the eye with a gnome. And I was like, oh, right, so his eye does get actually messed up. And so, you know, you'd think they make him give him the cyborg eye, but then he dies. I'm like, okay, right, okay, so interesting. So they're going to have to really write a way for him to come back if he's dead, but I guess he's dead now. And then there's like a line later where the leader of the bad guys, oh god, I'm like blanking on his name now. I can't remember it right this second, but Shang Tsung, I think it is, yeah. So the villain of the bad guys even says, you know, death is just another realm, which makes it sound like he has the ability to just bring these dead people out of this realm of death and just bring them back to life to fight. And if that's the case, I guess that would work because they've referenced it now in the movie as a way to bring them back. But then if the whole point of that is just to give Kano his cyborg eye in the sequel, it was just kind of messy. I think it would have just been better if all these people had their abilities from the get-go, and that's why they were chosen to be champions, and that's why they got the dragon marking, was because they were seen as capable enough and deadly enough to fight in this tournament. So yeah, that's all I'm going to say about the plot. It was messy, but it was dumb fun. I'm not going to say I didn't like it. I actually had a really good time with this movie. I thought it was dumb fun, and I think if you're a Mortal Kombat fan and you go into this just expecting to enjoy the fights and not kind of care too much about the story itself, I think you'll really enjoy this. Like I did, because I did go into it just expecting to like the fights and the fatalities and stuff, and I came out liking the characters. Everything was great. I just think the story was weak. The story itself was weak, but yeah, so everything was great. The story just wasn't there for me. Like, it just didn't quite mesh together, which is really weird because the pacing of this movie was really good. I thought this was a really smooth ride, even though not a lot made sense. I kind of, you don't really dwell on it for too much because the movie just moves along at a really good pace, and you're kind of just enjoying the ride as you go along, and you just kind of realize this is dumb popcorn fun that you can enjoy. You know, you can enjoy this movie with your mates and have a few beers, that kind of movie. So yeah, let's move on to the characters actually. So they have introduced this brand new character that specifically for this movie that I believe isn't in the games. He's just created specifically for this movie. He's called Cole Young, and in the movie he's this oh god, I'm really bad with like boxing and MMA fighting and all that. I don't really know which is which, but basically he's a fighter in like a cage match. He does like, you know, he gets paid $200 to win a match, I guess. And he's not particularly great at fighting, but the whole point of his character is that he is used to help bring the audience into the movie. He's used to be the character to say, you know, oh, what does this mean? What's Mortal Kombat? Who are you guys? Like, he's literally there just to ask questions so that we as an audience can understand what's going on. And that's fine, actually would make sense. But the problem with that is there's other characters who also don't really know what's going on. Like, for example, Kano. I think Kano does a really good job, probably a better job, actually, than the Cole Young character does at trying to represent the audience, essentially. I mean, all his reactions are so funny, and he reacts the same way that, you know, we as an audience would, especially if you have no idea what Mortal Kombat is. And he's just like saying, you know, what the fuck's going on? Oh wow, you can shoot fireballs. How do you do that? And you just hit me with a fireball. So does that mean I get powers? Like, he's literally just asking all the questions that anyone who doesn't know what Mortal Kombat is would be asking. And I'm just thinking, this is kind of what Cole should be saying, because that's the whole point of his character being created specifically for the movie. So that was weird. So I thought Cole Young was he probably wasn't needed. In fact, you probably needed someone like Johnny Cage, who is a Hollywood actor character. I think he could have done just a good job, just as good a job as being the guy to bring the audience into this world, and then that way you don't have to create a character. So Cole was fine. He didn't really do the job that he was meant for, because it felt like other characters were also doing that job of bringing the audience in. So I honestly just don't think he was very needed. I guess he was there to give the film a bit of an emotional side to it, because they introduced the fact that he has a family, and throughout the movie there's moments where the family gets attacked or the family gets kidnapped by the villains, and so it just kind of felt like he was there to bring some kind of emotion and some kind of tension to the movie by just continuously using his family as a target. I don't know, it was weird, but I don't think it was necessary, and this movie wasn't really trying to be too emotional anyway, so I'm not really sure what the point of his character is, and I think the movie could have kind of done without it and just replaced him with another Mortal Kombat character that already existed. So that's what I've got to say about the new character. Kano. He was my favourite character in this movie. And I was actually thinking, it would have been great if Johnny Cage was in this movie, because he's the comedic relief. He's got like all these crazy lines, and he's just kind of, really, he takes the piss out of, basically the Hollywood actor stereotype. And I thought he would have been really funny to see in this movie. But Kano, he kind of filled in that position really well. The actor who plays him was the best actor in the entire movie, and I feel like that actor knew what kind of movie he was in, and so actually played up to that tremendously well. So yeah, Kano was the best. He was the funniest character. He did a really good job of, bringing the audience into this world, and just his reactions to everything were just really believable. And he was just having fun with it, and you could tell the actor was having fun in the role, and that was kind of contagious and kind of made me really enjoy the role, and the movie, because he was in it. But the one thing was, my heart kind of sank when they killed him in, like, I guess 3/4 of the way in, they kill off Kano, and I was like, oh no, what are you doing? Like, you just killed the best thing in this movie. Why would you do that? Like, Kano was the only thing really helping this movie move along at a really, on a really fun ride. So I was like, oh god, why'd you kill Kano? But I'm sure he'll be back in a sequel. And actually, they managed to still hold their own without Kano in the last quarter, which I was quite impressed by. So I was like, okay, fair enough. Like, you can still keep up. But I think that's to do a lot with the fights and the fatalities and the choreography of all that, which I think, apart from Kano, was the other saving grace of this movie. So that's what I've got to say about Kano, my favourite character, the best thing in the movie, in my opinion. Next, we move on to Sub-Zero, who is the coolest villain in the movie. His fighting, it's awesome. The way they do the choreography with his character is great. And that's because the actor who plays him, I believe, is an actor in the movie The Raid. I haven't seen The Raid. I've seen a lot of clips. But the fighting in that movie is insane. So it makes sense why they hired him to do the fighting in this, because he's just amazing at doing fight scenes. And the powers they did, the ice powers with his character, were really well handled. The effects look great. And also they incorporated moves that he has from the game. And they did it really naturally, actually. I thought if they're going to do moves from the game, which are quite unusual moves to see in movies in general, because obviously they're like superpowers, and he can clone himself with ice as a decoy, or he can, make a wall of ice and throw someone into it. I thought these are going to be really obvious moments that are forced in to reference the game, but they actually worked really well, and I felt like 99% of the video game moves incorporated into these movies' fight scenes, I thought were done really well. The only move that stood out to me as like, that doesn't look quite as cool in live action, is I think his name is Liu Kang, and he's the guy who has the fireball powers. And in the game, he has this great move where he jumps. You can jump at your enemy and do like 10 kicks. I forget what the move's called. Basically, he can do 10 kicks in the middle of the air. And it's just a really annoying move to try and block or get around, because it's just such a fun move to do, and it's quite handy. with his character. So they do that move in the game. They do that move in the movie. And I thought, I mean, it's a cool reference, but it doesn't look quite right. It looks a bit odd in live action. Like he's clearly on wires. Like maybe if you could make him fly across the space a bit faster, so it wasn't so distracting that how unrealistically he's in midair for kicking. But I kind of let them slide with that because they got 99% of those moves naturally flowing into the choreography of the fights. But Sub-Zero's powers looked amazing. The fight was great. And speaking of how great the fights were, every time Scorpion and Sub-Zero fought, I thought, oh, this looks fantastic. This looks amazing. And again, I think the guy who played Scorpion was also a guy who had experience in fight scenes. And you can just tell these guys really know what they're doing. And it's kind of a shame in some ways because when Sub-Zero and Scorpion fight at the beginning and the end of the movie, they're like the best fights, like the most well thought out fights and the most skilled fights in the movie, and they look amazing. But the problem with that is the movie likes to cut around the fights a lot. And I was just thinking that sucks because these guys clearly are fighting. It's not like they've got stunt doubles in. These actors are clearly fighting in these scenes. And you're just cutting around to different camera shots a lot. And I kind of wish they filmed it more John Wick style, where you're actually just taking a moment to enjoy the shot, just hold onto the fight scene as long as possible, and just see them fight it out as skilledly as they are in just one shot. So it was a little annoying that they cut around such skilled fighters constantly. But I have a feeling that's to do with the fact that I imagine there's actors in this movie who don't have a big experience with fight scenes, or just have a high level of fight choreography in their history of acting. So I presume they definitely had to cut around their fights because it just looked cooler for those actors who aren't as experienced at these choreographed fights, because they are really like high level fights with with Scorpion and Sub-Zero. So I can understand why they cut around characters like Kano and Sonya and that, because you do probably kind of need to cut around it with people who aren't as experienced as fighting. And I guess they just wanted to keep that consistent with just the editing of the entire movie, because maybe it would be distracting that fights with Scorpion and Sub-Zero could have been shot really clearly with as few cuts as possible, and then all of a sudden we're doing rapid cutting to Sonya and Kano, and that would have just looked very, I guess, inconsistent and maybe distracting. So I can kind of understand if that was the reason why they had to do the constant editing with all the fights. So I could kind of put a pass on that. It just would have been cool if for Sub-Zero and Scorpion's fight scenes we could have just held on these shots a bit longer to appreciate how great these actors are in these fight scenes. Also, the weird thing is, the first 7 minutes of this movie was released online before the movie was released. And so if you haven't seen the movie, you can watch that. And let me just tell you, I can understand now after watching the movie why they released those first 7 minutes, because it basically sets up Scorpion and Sub-Zero's conflict with each other and why they're enemies. And the way it's filmed and the fighting in it, it's just such a high standard of cinema for what is really just a kind of a weird, goofy sounding game. They actually managed to make this thing feel really cinematic in the first 7 minutes. And I think if they kind of didn't build the world as big as they did in this movie, you could probably have got away with it and made something actually that felt more like almost a piece of art than just a casual blockbuster. Because those 7 minutes are really solid, and if they could keep that tone throughout the entire movie, you could have had something really special. But I think by doing that, you'd have to sacrifice the sillier elements of the movie, which it's just difficult. The first 7 minutes were amazing, but it would have been really hard to keep that level of cinema throughout the entire movie without sacrificing the more out there elements of the game. So I can kind of understand that. But it was just very interesting how different the first 7 minutes are to the rest of the film. Because I think some people might be disappointed that when they watch the first 7 minutes, they'll be like, oh, oh, this looks amazing, this looks fantastic. I'm surprised people are saying these things about the movie, or I'm not surprised that they're saying things about the movie because it looks amazing. So I'll just tell you, if you're going to go and see this movie based on the first 7 minutes, I would calm your expectations a bit, because it won't be like that throughout the entire movie. It will get goofy and kind of dumb, but it is really fun and it is really entertaining regardless. Actually, Cole Young's not even the weakest character. I've actually noted down that I thought Raiden and hope I'm saying it right, Shang Tsung. So basically, the two leaders of the two teams. So you got Raiden, who's the team of the Earth Realm champions, and you've got Shang Tsung, the villain, who's the leader of the Outworld champions. And I thought they were really boring because in the game, Raiden has amazing fighting moves and amazing powers, and it's really cool the way he utilizes it in the game. But in the movie, he just stands there and barely does anything. I don't think he even fights once. And they explain it as a way, they say he's a god, Raiden, and so he can't interfere with what's going on as far as the tournament's concerned, which then kind of contradicts itself, because he's very conveniently, apparently there's certain moments where he could intervene and just teleport everyone out of danger. So it was like, well, you said you couldn't intervene, but then there's times where you can, and he's not even, and I wouldn't even mind if he was intervening in a really cool way, like actually getting a one-on-one fight, but he doesn't. He just stands there, he hits his staff to the ground, lightning strikes, and he just saves the day in one move, and it's kind of boring, because I'm like, Raiden's really cool to watch in the game fighting. I was just really disappointed that Raiden didn't have a fight scene. And so I just thought it was really frustrating. I mean, Shang Tsung wasn't much different. Again, he's just standing there telling the villains what to do. And he just does one move where he just grabs Kung Lao and just sucks his soul. And I was like, I mean, he did something more than Raiden, I guess, as far as killing someone, but it was just frustrating. They were just two leaders, quite generically portrayed. They weren't particularly memorable leaders, leader character types. I mean, one was quite chilled for a villain. He could have gone a bit more campy with it, especially for the tone of the majority of the movie. I think he could have put a bit more energy into his character's read of his lines, basically, and the way he talks. And then Raiden constantly just had negative things to say. So he didn't come across as wise or someone that you could look up to for hope, because basically he just said, oh crap, like, well, we're going to lose this tournament because you haven't even got a dragon marking, you've got no powers, and you don't even know how to fight. And so he's just literally just digging into these champions constantly. He's not praising them. He's not giving them any hope and saying like, oh no, you can do it. You're the champions. You've been chosen for a reason. You can do it. He's not saying any of that. He's literally just digging into them constantly and being negative. He's not being optimistic whatsoever. And I was like, my God, you're the worst leader I've ever seen in a movie. And he's even like referenced as Gandalf as a joke. And I'm like, man, I would rather you have a personality really similar to Gandalf, because at least you could balance out, being a stern leader with being an optimist. Like, he just had none of that. So that was a bit of a disappointment, especially for really cool characters in the game. I wouldn't have even minded that they didn't fight if they just had a better personality in this movie. The way it was written and the way the actors portrayed those characters, they just came across very boring, and they're actually the things that I don't particularly look forward to rewatching the movie, or if a sequel comes out, they won't be the characters that I look forward to seeing. But they're fine in the roles that they have to do. It's just kind of underwhelming because you can do so much with those characters. So those are pretty much the key characters I had a lot of good things to say about, and some not so good things to say. Everyone else, like Sonya, Jax, what's his name? Kabao. I honestly, there's quite a few characters, and I don't know all their names off by heart. But all those other actors were really good. I thought they were portrayed well. I think all the actors actually were really good in their roles, apart from Raiden and Shang Tsung. I think they could have done with different casting. They just didn't quite feel right to me. But Kano and Sonya and Jax, they all felt like they were those characters, and I loved seeing Cabal and the girl with the crazy teeth face. I thought they were all good, even though they used in small doses. I just thought they were entertaining for the short amount of time screen that they had. So the characters overall were good. The way they were utilized didn't always work, but especially with Kano, that example works really well, and most of them work well. It's just a few that I'm like, you could have done more with that character, or you didn't. The actor's playing it too reserved for a movie about a really bizarre concept. So those are the characters. The fights, as I've mentioned, they cut around a lot of the fights. That was a bit frustrating, but at the same time, well, not even frustrating, it was just a bit distracting, because maybe as someone who loves films and kind of knows behind the scenes stuff, I knew that these people were good at fighting, and so maybe that bothered me, because I'm like, you're wasting you're wasting these actors by cutting around them. So maybe it just bothered me. Maybe it didn't bother anyone else, but as someone who kind of loves watching behind the scenes stuff, that kind of distracted me a little bit. But apart from that, the choreography was great. I didn't think there were any fights that looked particularly bad. I will say the fatalities were good, and they had actually quite a few of them. Actually, they had quite a few fights. I feel like there might have been about, like 8 fights in this movie, that's a lot of fight sequences for a movie that's what felt like 90 minutes. It didn't feel that particularly long. I can't remember how long it is, but it's definitely not 2 hours. Oh no, wait, is it? No. It's under 2 hours. It's like it's definitely like 90 minutes. It was really paceful, and they kept it all condensed in a nice short amount of time. And I'm kind of glad they did that, especially with the way the script was going. I don't think this needed expanding, because the rules already didn't make too much sense, so you didn't really need to expand it any further. But yeah, the fights were great. We had a lot of fights. They were choreographed really well. The fatalities were really good, and there was one fatality I was like, wow, that itself looks like it looks like it's been pulled straight out of the recent Mortal Kombat games, and I was like, that looks fantastic. So you get fatalities like Kano ripping out Reptile's heart. I believe that's from the game, and that's the most fun fatality, because he's loving doing that fatality so much, and he even says, he calls it the heart of fucking beauty and all that, and I'm like, man, he's just loving fighting, and that's just really contagious to watch. The enjoyment that he's having, I'm getting as well. And there was Jax. He smashed someone's head open, or just smashed it completely with his mechanical cyborg arms. We also had, as I said, Shang Tsung do some soul sucking, which wasn't bloody, but it was cool nonetheless to see. We had I'm getting mixed between Kung Lao and Liu Kang. I think it's Liu Kang who has the fire powers. He does his fire dragon move, which you see in the trailer. And that was cool. I thought it was going to be bloody, but it wasn't. It was just the guy was set on fire. And I was like, cool, still looks cool. It's something from the game. And the best, or the most bloody one that felt most like it was from the recent Mortal Kombat games was... oh god, guys, forgive me, sorry. Kung Lu, who has the frisbee hat. He uses his frisbee hat as a buzzsaw, and basically grabs this enemy and takes her into the buzzsaw hat, and she literally gets sliced in half. And you can see the inside of her skull, you can see the brains, you can see all that. And it just felt so satisfying to see something that's so violent that I've seen from the games be brought to life in this movie. And that was the one moment I was like, wow, they did it to a really extreme level. And I was really surprised about it, because I thought, Mortal Kombat these days in the games, they are so violent. I thought they're never going to do this level of violence in the movie. It's just so over the top, so bloody, so violent. I can't imagine, they'd want to risk, losing certain viewers who aren't fans of the games over how violent it is. But they managed to get away with it by just doing a simple one where someone gets, sawn in half. And it's really graphic, it's really violent, but it's not as insane as the craziest violent fatalities are in the game. So I was like, wow, you managed to somehow incorporate a move that actually feels like it's genuinely from the game. Like, looking at it, I almost forgot it was the movie and not the game. It was really strange, but well done to them for managing to squeeze a really violent fatality in there. I'm sure if they were going to do it, they were only able to put one particularly graphic fatality in there, so it was great. Also, speaking of that, they managed to fit in tons of Easter eggs and references. I could recognize a lot of the references and Easter eggs, but being someone who hasn't played the story mode, I didn't really know how big of a reference they were. Like, for example, when they go into the temple, the characters, they see all this artwork of previous tournaments, and I was like, oh, I recognize, these characters from the games, but I don't know if I don't know if there's a bigger meaning than just, oh, there's the character there, isn't that cool? So there was a lot of references for fans like that, and also they managed to fit in a lot of lines from the game in the movie, and they just about got away with it. It didn't feel too forced. They managed to squeeze a lot of them in pretty well. Like Kano wins, I thought that was his best line. It was one of his best lines, but yeah, Kano ripping out Reptile's heart and saying, Kano wins. And you also got a fatality, someone said, finish them. You got another one that was flawless victory. Like, the characters are actually saying this, and I'm like, wow, you managed to somehow kind of seamlessly fit them in. There was a few times where I'm like, okay, if you rewatch it a few times, you'll pick up on how certain lines do feel a little bit forced, but it's a Mortal Kombat movie. What are you expecting? So I do enjoy that they're in there, but I watched Mortal Kombat 2021 twice, and on the second viewing I realized Scorpion has his famous line in the trailer where he goes, get over here, and he pulls someone over by the chains. And I thought, oh, that's really cool that they put it in there. But then the second time I watched the movie, I realized, actually, that's kind of odd for him to say that in this version of Mortal Kombat, because he speaks, I think he speaks Japanese. I think he's Japanese in the movie. He speaks a different language the entire movie. Even when he's surrounded by English-speaking characters, he'll still talk, Japanese. On the second viewing, it just made me laugh. That, like, it's really weird. He only speaks English just for that one line because it's his catchphrase from the game. But it's just little things like that where I just say it's dumb fun. Turn your brain off. Don't think about it too much. And if you do, I think you're not going to enjoy the movie. So just sit back and just put logic behind you. I'd probably compare this movie on the level of dumb fun as I would with Venom. I think Venom is another movie that's like got dumb fun because when you think about the logic of it, it's like there's a lot of plot holes and there's a lot of things that don't really make sense in this world, but it's having fun. It's not trying to be serious, so why should I take this world seriously either? So yeah, I think that's a good comparison. Mortal Kombat's like Venom minus the gore. I actually think Venom would have been improved if they were allowed an R rating for that movie. But yeah, so that the plot didn't work, but that was the only real flaw of the movie. For the majority of the time, the characters were really fun and worked really well. The fights were really good. They had great fatalities. So there was a lot of really things done well. Even the costumes and sets, I thought the costumes looked great. There was like one time where I'm like, oh, that's like a rubber suit. I think it's like at the end where Sub-Zero is fighting Cole Young and Scorpion, and eventually, gradually, his armor's coming off, or he's taking his armor off, or whatever. And like his shoulder pads, I think when he drops them, when he takes them off, or whatever, they kind of look rubbery. And I'm like, come on, man. Like, yeah, sure, when you were wearing it, they could have used a rubber one, but when you're focusing on the pieces of his armor coming off, you could have just changed that with a replica that was actually made of harder material than rubber. Because I think when he takes his mask off, and it falls to the ground, it's just literally like a latex rubber mask that you could probably buy online. And again, it's fine because I'm like, well, it's got to fit around his head. But then there's that metal mask piece on his mouth. And even that looks rubber when it drops. I'm like, that kind of ruined the illusion a little bit. But it was the only one time the costume looked a little fake. But majority of the time, visually, this movie, as far as the visual aesthetics go and how they're visually trying to replicate the game, as far as I can tell, they did a really good job making everything look great in live action. The powers look good in live action. The costumes look amazing. Just the redesigns they do to try and fit it into their universe look really good. And the score wasn't amazing, but the score wasn't bad either. I think the score just did what it needed to do, really. It wasn't anything groundbreaking, and it wasn't anything that felt particularly inspired. But they managed to fit the theme song in there in the last fight, and then the proper theme song in its pure epicness in the credits. So I thought, cool, they incorporated the theme song actually in the movie itself, so that was cool. One thing I do want to say, actually, going back to the characters, we had a character called, oh god, is it Goru? I think it's Goru. He's the four-armed monster from Mortal Kombat. He was underutilized because it seemed like he should have been a bigger threat, but he was a character that got taken out really quickly, and I was like, oh, okay. By Cole Young, who's someone who's not very experienced at fighting. Not that he's not experienced, he's just not very good at fighting. Like, the running joke with Cole Young is that he's basically a human punch bag. Like, he just gets beaten up a lot and fights. And it turns out that his inner power is that he can turn a bracelet that his daughter gave him into a suit of armor and make that into, like, the suit of armor that forms around him is basically like a Black Panther suit, and it can basically store kinetic energy from being punched around a lot, and then he can turn that kinetic energy into an epic punch to the face to his opponent. And I was like, oh, that's a cool power, and it's cool that it fits in with how his fighting style. But the only problem with that is it came out of his bracelet and it's a suit, and I'm like, but if he wasn't wearing the bracelet, would the suit come out anyway, or would it just come out of another piece of clothing? Like, why does it have to be the bracelet? Why can't his skin just form that? So it was just kind of, again, one of those things where you think, don't think about it, just accept that happened in the movie and just move on with it. So I just kind of let that slide. And just to finish off, there was a Johnny Cage tease at the end of the movie. It wasn't a post-credit scene, it was literally the last shot of the movie was us looking at a poster with Johnny Cage on it, but we didn't see his face. We just saw Johnny Cage's name and sort of his torso on the poster, because obviously they haven't cast that actor yet. And if I had to say who I'd want to cast, I can't really think of a lot of actors off the top of my head, and I couldn't really while I was watching the movie or even thinking after. I think Ryan Reynolds is just the safe choice, and I think he's one of the choices a lot of people want. I can understand if you don't like that choice, because it seems like he just does anything that's comedic. Like, you know, he's Deadpool and he voiced Pikachu, and I'm sure a lot of people found that distracting at first because it's the voice of Deadpool in Pikachu's body. So I can understand, but the fact he's done Pokemon Detective Pikachu, I think shows he won't shy away from video game adaptations in movies. So I think there's a chance he could be the next Johnny Cage. And also, I think on his Twitter account, well, it might be his Instagram, I think it's his Twitter account, obviously he's aware that people have been talking about him in reference to Johnny Cage and, you know, casting rumors, and he actually posted a picture of his face photoshopped onto Johnny Cage. So you never know, there might be a chance that we will get Ryan Reynolds. I mean, he's clearly aware that people want this, and he's clearly aware how much people are talking about him and the character Johnny Cage. So I'd actually be up for seeing him be Johnny Cage, and hopefully that becomes a reality, assuming that the movie does well. I think the movie at the moment is doing well, but I think, you know, to really secure that sequel, we need more people to go see it. So if you're a fan of Mortal Kombat, I do recommend you see it, because it's got everything in there that's Mortal Kombat. I would say go in there just expecting dumb fun. Don't go in there expecting a masterpiece of cinema. I'm not sure anyone's really expecting that, especially with the fact that video game adaptations don't tend to be that like a piece of artwork. They tend to be just good fun for the fans of the games. You know, like Sonic the Hedgehog, that movie did really well. And it's getting a sequel, but really when you look at it, it's very different from the games as far as having these characters in the real world and stuff like that. So they throw things from the game, but it's not the most purest adaptation of that game. And, you know, the same with here. The majority of it gets it right, but don't go in here expecting the next, you know, don't go in it expecting that it's going to be the best video game adaptation, because for me, I think this is the most fun video game movie I've ever seen. But as far as a coherent story and world, I actually think that I think it's a 2018 Tomb Raider, the latest Tomb Raider movie. I actually think that is, as far as the story goes and everything, I think that is the best adaptation of a game. But I think Mortal Kombat is the most fun video game movie to watch. So overall, I do really recommend it as a good piece of entertainment for 90 minutes. I know at the beginning of the review it might have sounded like I didn't like this movie because I had a lot to say about the plot not making sense and being quite messy. But again, what saves this movie is Kano, the actor that plays him. His performance is on point, it's funny, it's self-aware, like even to the point where in the movie he has to fight Liu Kang. And Liu Kang's doing this spammy move that you see players do in the game where he just spins and kicks Kano to the ground over and over again, which if you've played Mortal Kombat, you know that's just a move people spam to try and win. So that was really funny. He just made a lot of jokes about the world, and that helped me enjoy it. I think if there was no comedy in this and it took itself seriously like the first 7 minutes of the movie, I think it would have struggled. So this movie definitely needed Kano in there to make fun of how ridiculous this movie is so that you could enjoy it even more. And also the fighting. If you're watching Mortal Kombat, I presume you're watching it first and foremost for the fighting and for the fatalities. And it does deliver, and you won't be disappointed, and you will have a smile on your face seeing these fatalities on screen. So overall, I do really recommend the movie. It's not a masterpiece, but it was a good bit of fun. And I will probably get this on DVD to add to my collection because it was fun and I had a good time. And I could see myself easily putting this on my TV more so than any other video game movie I've seen so far. So yeah, go out and watch it. Thank you so much, guys, for listening to my podcast. If you'd like to support the channel, there's a link in the description below for a song that's available on iTunes called Take It Off by a band called The Undersiders. So if you want to support the channel, go check that song out. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram. I tend to use Instagram as a way to kind of let you guys know what I'm up to in between making videos, and I also use that and Twitter as a way of announcing content that's coming up, or actually letting you guys know that new content is available. So if you want to follow me on any of my social media, the links for that will be in the description below as well. Thank you guys so much for supporting the channel. Thank you for listening, and I hope you have a great week. So take care, guys, and stay safe.